my name is Peter Chekrin. I'm born and raised and living in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I am hemophilia A factor 8, considered mild or sneaky, if that's the term we use nowadays. I think the first time it was suspected that I had an issue was when I was maybe 3 or 4, and I was jumping on the bed. I fell off and I hit my head on the heating register, and considering that the tiny cut that I had, it did bleed quite a lot. So that was the first inkling that there was an issue.
Moving on from there, when did you? When was it? When did your family, or did you consider you probably needed to look into this further? Because that sounds like what it sounds like is that you got a cut and it took too long to stop, but
Right.
You didn't necessarily seek any extra medical attention.
No. Well, see, my grandfather had a bleeding issue. He managed to get through life with not too much of a problem, which is quite amazing. He did have an appendix operation before I was born, and that was a huge issue for him. So it was kind of known in my family that there was something going on. My one cousin also has mild hemophilia. So he was a little bit older than me, but as we were growing up, it would either be one or the other of us that was having some sort of an issue. So I had gone to my GP when I was a kid, and he called me a pseudo-hemophiliac. That was the term they used back in those years. I know back when I was about 10, I had cut my finger on opening a pop bottle in one of those, in the store, in one of those big coolers, and there was a flaw in the bottle, and it split, and it cut my thumb, and that was probably the really most serious, up to when I was 10 years old, injury that I had received. And that took a long time to heal. That's when I went to different specialists and clinics, and everyone was trying everything, and I mean, nothing worked at all, of course. It just went on and on and on. It took probably, that happened on the first day of summer holidays, June 30th. And it healed finally at the point, probably by the next May. It was almost a year before it healed properly. So at that point, we knew that I had to be either careful or there was something going on, but there was still no specific treatment in Winnipeg at that time, or not one that we knew of anyway.
So then when was the diagnosis?
So, like I said, my family doctor called me a pseudo-hemophiliac, but when I was 16, riding my bike with my friend, we were riding around the school, and another girl was riding from the other side of the school. She came right around the corner and crashed into my friend, and they went flying. I was fine. All that happened was that his bike slid and hit mine, and I kind of fell over backwards, and I leaned on my wrist, and I ended up severely hyperextending my elbow and did all kinds of damage. Of course, I didn't do anything, didn't go into I didn't do anything. But the next morning it was so bad, had to go into emerge. And at that point they said, okay, we've got to check this out. And I had the blood test and all that stuff, and that was 1972.
And so you were diagnosed with something more than pseudo-hemophilia.
Yes, so my elbow was in like really bad shape, and I started on cryoprecipitate. That was the first time I had that treatment, 1972, or was it 3? Mine was 73. Yeah, summer of 73. So I began, they started me on cryo 3 times a day for a week and slowly tapered it off. And I had my elbow in a cast, and generally that was my treatment. And then they scaled back the amount of cryo I was getting slowly until it was under control. Started to improve, and then they said, okay, it's time to take the cast off. And when they did that, I don't know, I guess sometime during the night I must have moved my arm, and the next morning it was back or worse than it was. So it took a while. It was like until probably Christmas of that year before it was finally resolved. And it took, I would say I had about 3 or 4 years where my elbow was just very stiff. I couldn't do anything with it. As of now, it has it doesn't bother me at all, so I managed to get through that.
Did you end up with any significant or insignificant range of motion issues with your elbow as a result?
I would say for about 3 or 4 years, I could not straighten it out. It was weaker, and it was an issue, and then slowly it came around, and like I said, as of today, it's no different than my other elbow.
Was there the time between the first inklings, the cut head, and
Yep.
And your and the pseudo diagnosis, and then the diagnosis that came later? Did you think of yourself as a bleeder or someone
Yeah,
with bleeding issues?
We use that term in the family because, as I said, my cousin, who was 5 years older than me, also had about the same level of mild hemophilia that I did. He participated in a lot of sports when he was growing up, so he had repeated issues with bleeds and that. So we knew that there was definitely something going on, and but with all the doctors and specialists we saw, there was no, that was never suggested until I was 16 that factor VIII was even a possibility. So, and even for my cousin. So I don't know what was going on in Winnipeg at that time, or whether the doctors were just not knowledgeable enough. But it wasn't until, like I said, 1973 that I received factor VIII.
And so moving forward, your how would you say, from diagnosis to now, how has your bleeding disorder affected your life?
Well, I used cryoprecipitate for many years, and that whenever I had a bleeding episode, that's what I did. Either went to Emerge, had that treatment. I never treated myself or at home. As I became an adult, I had fewer episodes of bleeding because I was just more careful and that kind of thing. Eventually, I think it was the hemophilia clinic, and one of the doctors suggested I could try DDAVP rather than using cryo. So I went on that, and I had a very good response to it. So I moved from cryoprecipitate to DDAVP. Unfortunately, that move was after I had used cryo for so many years that I ended up with HCV. And I didn't find out about that until I was 39. It was after a year of my marriage, and because we were planning on having a child, I wanted to increase my family life insurance through my work. So I did that. As part of it, I had to submit blood tests and everything for that. So the insurance company got back to me and said I was denied and told me, we recommend you contact your doctor. I had no idea what that was about or why they were saying that. And when I did, I learned that I had hepatitis C. And our doctors knew about it. And I asked, well, why was I not told? They said, well, there was no treatment for it. There's nothing we could do about it, so there was no reason to tell you, which I thought was kind of strange. And then when we went through the whole hepatitis C compensation, class action and all that stuff, I had to find my records, and I went through, and because it was defined as being that 1986 to 1990 period, well, that was the period where I had switched from cryo to DDAVP. But I had known that there was a time when my sister was on holidays and I was house sitting her place. And I had ended up with severe shin splints because I was running and I was trying to keep in shape, and I ended up with a really severe bleed in my leg. This is about the 4th or 5th episode. So when I went to emerge, the doctor suggested, we want to get this under control right away. We're not going to use DDAVP this time. We are definitely going to use cryo because we want to get under control quickly. Unfortunately, those records were lost or destroyed or whatever. So in my compensation plan, I was denied because in that window, they said you were not treated. So I ended up appealing the decision, and they sent me all these records, and from the Red Cross showing all the units and what I received and when I received it, and they said, that's what you received, there's no time you received it up that date, so you were denied. So I spent months going through all the microfiches and records and hard copies of stuff, and I ended up finding a dental record, one copy of a microfiche saying that the dentist wanted me to be treated beforehand because it was going to be an involved procedure. So just to be safe, to be treated beforehand. So I had, and it said on there to be treated with cryoprecipitate. And they didn't find that record. I found it. So when I went to the appeal, I said, are you sure that those are all the records that I have? That defines all my records. And they said, yes. And I said, what about this one? And my whole point was that the record keeping was not consistent. Records were lost. And so I ended up winning my appeal on that. So it took years to get through all that. So one of the reasons I would love to see my records electronically organized so that, anyone, any doctor can have access and will know what my history is.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
That's a good start.